Jake Harrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the atmospheric processor readings on his tablet. The machine hummed quietly in the red canyon below, converting the thin air of Kestrel Prime into something humans could breathe without masks. 300 light-years from Earth, this planet felt more like home to him than anywhere else he had ever lived. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty landscape. Red rocks jutted up from the ground like ancient monuments, and sparse green plants dotted the rolling hills. It reminded Jake of Montana, where he grew up on his grandfather's ranch before everything went wrong. Here on Kestrel Prime, he could pretend that past never happened. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked back to his hoverbike. The machine looked like someone had crossed a motorcycle with a small aircraft. It floated 3 feet off the ground and could carry him across the planet's surface faster than any ground vehicle. Jake had painted it black with silver trim, just like his old horse back home. "Morning report coming in, Jake?" said Belle, his AI assistant. Her voice came through the speakers in his helmet, warm and friendly like the Mari he had named her. "After all systems running smooth today. Geological survey shows stable ground conditions across sectors 7 through 12. Jake nodded as he climbed onto the hoverbike. Belle had been his only companion for 2 years now. The terraforming company that hired him promised regular supply runs and communication with other settlements, but those visits came only every 6 months. Most days, Jake preferred it that way. He gunned the engine and took off across the plains, heading toward the eastern canyons where he needed to check another processor. The wind felt good against his face, even through the helmet's filter. Below him, small animals scattered as his shadow passed over them. Some looked like rabbits. With 6 legs, others resembled lizards the size of house cats. As he flew deeper into the canyon system, Jake noticed something unusual. His scanner picked up strange energy readings from a narrow gorge he had never explored before. The readings were faint but steady, like a heartbeat. Curiosity got the better of him, and he steered the hoverbike toward the source. The gorge was barely wide enough for his bike to fit through. Steep walls rose on both sides, carved smooth by ancient water flows that had long since dried up. Jake slowed down as the passage opened into a hidden valley, circular and about the size of a football field. What he saw there made him stop the bike and stare. Small, dragon-like creatures moved through the valley in groups. They were no bigger than house cats, with scales that shifted color in the sunlight from deep blue to bright silver. Their wings were thin membranes stretched between delicate bones, and they used them to glide between rocky ledges rather than truly fly. Jake counted at least 30 of the creatures, maybe more. They seemed to be organized into family groups, with larger ones watching over smaller ones that could only be babies. The little ones played together, chasing each other around rock formations and making soft chirping sounds. He had been on Kestrel Prime for 2 years and had never seen anything like them. The initial planetary survey had found only simple animals, nothing with this level of intelligence or organization. These creatures built small nests in the cliff walls and worked together to gather food. Jake turned off his engine and sat quietly, watching. One of the larger creatures noticed him and made a low, warbling sound. The others stopped what they were doing and looked in his direction. Their eyes were large and dark, filled with an intelligence that made Jake's skin crawl in the best possible. "Way, Val, are you recording this?" He whispered into his helmet microphone. "Yes, Jake, I'm getting excellent visual data. These creatures are not in any of my databases. They appear to be previously undiscovered." The largest of the creatures, one with scales that gleamed like polished metal, took a few steps toward Jake's hoverbike. It tilted its head to one side, studying him the same way he was studying it. For a moment, Jake felt like the creature was looking right into his soul. Then, as quickly as they had noticed him, the creatures went back to their activities. The large one gave him one last look before turning away to tend to the young ones. Jake realized he had been holding his breath. He spent the next hour watching them from a distance. The creatures had a complex social structure with different individuals taking turns at various tasks. Some gathered food, others cared for the young, and a few seemed to be on guard duty. Watching the sky and the canyon entrance, when Jake finally started his hoverbike to leave, he felt like he was saying, "Goodbye to old friends." The creatures looked up at the sound of his engine but didn't seem afraid. If anything, they appeared curious about him. On the ride back to his homestead, Jake's mind raced with questions. Where had these creatures come from? Why hadn't the survey teams found them? And most importantly, what was he going to do about them? His homestead sat on a small rise overlooking a wide valley. The building looked like an old frontier cabin, though it was made from advanced materials that could withstand the planet's harsh weather. Solar panels and communication arrays were the only signs that this wasn't actually the American West. Of 2 centuries ago, Jake parked his hoverbike in the small garage and went inside. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a main room, bedroom, kitchen, and work area. Pictures of Earth landscapes decorated the walls, mostly scenes from Montana and Wyoming. He pulled up the footage Bell had recorded and watched it again. On his main screen, the creatures were definitely intelligent, maybe more so than some of the animals back on Earth. They deserved protection, but Jake wasn't sure who would provide it. The terraforming company that employed him cared only about making the planet suitable for human colonization. If they knew about these creatures, they might see them as obstacles to be removed rather than native life to be preserved. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He would keep the creatures' location secret for now, and he would learn more about them. If they needed protection, he would provide it himself. That night, he cooked dinner and found himself setting aside some of the synthetic meat protein. Tomorrow, he would return to the hidden valley and see if the creatures might accept a peace offering from their new human neighbor outside his window. The stars of Kestrel Prime's night sky twinkled like diamonds against black velvet. Jake had no way of knowing that those same stars were being watched by other eyes that belonged to beings with very different intentions for the small dragon-like creatures he had discovered. Jake had been visiting the hidden valley for 3 weeks when everything changed. The small dragon creatures, which he had started calling Dragonlings, had grown used to his presence. They would take food from his hands and even seemed to enjoy the sound of his voice when he talked to them during his daily visits. The largest Dragonling, the one with metal-bright scales, had become especially friendly. Jake called him Ace because of the diamond-shaped marking on his forehead. Ace would often perch on Jake's shoulder while he sat quietly in the valley, watching the others play and work. On that Tuesday morning, Jake noticed something was wrong. Before he even reached the valley, his scanner picked up the debris signature of a spacecraft landing somewhere to the north. Bell confirmed what he feared. "Jake, I'm detecting a ship approximately 40 kilometers from your position. It's not broadcasting any identification codes, and it didn't file a flight plan with planetary control." Jake changed course and headed toward the landing site. As he got closer, he could see the ship through his binoculars. It was sleek and black, built for speed and stealth rather than cargo transport. This wasn't a supply run or a scientific mission. He circled the area at a distance, staying low behind the ridgelines. Through his scanner, he could see at least 12 humans moving around the ship. They wore military-style gear and carried weapons that definitely weren't standard. Terraforming equipment. Jake found a good hiding spot on a hill overlooking their camp and settled in to watch. Within an hour, he knew these people were trouble. They had set up scanning equipment that was sweeping the surrounding area in a systematic pattern. Whatever they were looking for, they planned to find it quickly. "Bell, can you identify their scanning frequency?" "The signature matches biological survey equipment." "Jake, they're looking for life forms, specifically ones with unique genetic markers." Jake's blood went cold. These people were here for the Dragonlings. He spent the rest of the day watching the strangers. Their leader was a tall man with gray hair and scars on his face. The others called him Captain Caldwell. They moved like soldiers, efficient and disciplined. Whatever organization they worked for had trained them well. That evening, Jake heard voices coming from their camp. He crept closer and listened from behind a boulder. "The initial scans are promising," one of them was saying. "We're definitely looking at a previously unknown species with the genetic markers we need." "How many?" Caldwell asked. "At least 50. Individuals, maybe more. They're concentrated in the canyon systems about 20 kilometers south of here. Jake's heart sank. They had found the Dragonlings. Good, Caldwell said. Titan Biotech is paying us 10 million credits for a full genetic sample. The life extension compounds in their scales are worth a fortune on the black market. Another voice spoke up. What about the terraforming station? There's a human out there. One colonist won't be a problem, Caldwell replied. We'll be gone before he knows what happened. Jake had heard enough. He crept back to his hoverbike and raced toward the hidden valley. When he arrived, the Dragonlings seemed agitated. They clustered together in small groups, making worried chirping sounds. Somehow, they knew danger was coming. Ace flew over to Jake and landed on his shoulder. The Dragonling's scales had turned a darker color, almost black with worry. Jake gently stroked the creature's head. It's going to be okay, buddy. I won't let anything happen to you. But Jake knew he was outnumbered 12-1. These weren't simple poachers with basic equipment. They were professionals with advanced technology and military training. He spent that night planning. His military background had taught him about guerrilla warfare, and his years as a rancher had given him knowledge of the local terrain. If he was smart about it, he might be able to even the odds. The next morning, Jake's worst fears came true. He found the first bodies near the outer edge of the valley. 3 Dragonlings lay dead, their beautiful scales stripped away, leaving only pale, bloody flesh behind. The sight made Jake sick to his stomach. Following the tracks left by the killers, Jake found their equipment set up. The poachers had portable scanners that could locate Dragonlings from miles away. They also had capture nets and containment units designed to keep the creatures alive during transport. Jake realized they weren't just killing for scales. They wanted live specimens too. That night, Jake began his war against the poachers. He started small, using skills learned from his grandfather's ranch and his time in the military. He sabotaged their scanner equipment with targeted electromagnetic pulses from his hoverbike's engine. He created false signals that sent their search teams in the wrong direction. When the poachers set up motion sensors around the valley, Jake used the Dragonling's own intelligence against the hunters. He taught Ace and the others to trigger the sensors and patterns that would confuse the automated systems. The poachers would race to investigate alarms, only to find empty rocks and desert wind, but Caldwell's team was learning too. After 3 days of failed hunts, they changed tactics. Instead of chasing the Dragonlings, they set traps near the water sources where the creatures had to drink. Jake discovered the first trap too late. He found 5 Dragonlings caught in energy nets, struggling helplessly as 2 poachers prepared to load them into containment units. Jake attacked from a ridge above, using his rifle to disable their equipment and force them to retreat. He freed the Dragonlings, but the message was clear. The poachers were getting smarter and more aggressive. That night, Caldwell himself came. Hunting? Jake watched through his binoculars as the scarred captain set up a new type of scanner, one that could penetrate the rock walls of the valley itself. There would be no more hiding. "We know you're out there, colonist," Caldwell called into the darkness. "You're interfering with a legitimate corporate operation. Walk away now, and we'll let you live." Jake's answer was a rifle shot that destroyed the captain's scanner. The declaration of war was official. Over the next 2 days, the conflict escalated. Jake used every trick he could think of. He collapsed tunnel entrances to block the poachers' vehicles. He hacked their communication system and filled their channels with feedback noise. He even stampeded a herd of the local 6-legged creatures through their camp in the middle of the night, but the poachers were wearing him down. They had more people, better equipment, and unlimited ammunition. Jake was running on 3 hours of sleep and whatever food he could eat. While on the move, the breaking point came when he found Ace wounded near the valley entrance. One of the poachers had shot the Dragonling with a tranquilizer dart, but Ace had managed to escape before they could capture him. The dart contained a tracking device. Jake realized the poachers were using Ace as bait, waiting for Jake to reveal himself while trying to help his friend. It was a clever trap, and Jake was walking right into it. As he knelt beside the wounded Dragonling, Jake heard the sound of hoverbikes approaching from 3 directions. Caldwell's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "End of the line, Cowboy. You've caused us enough trouble." Jake checked his rifle. He had maybe 20 shots left and nowhere to run. The Dragonlings were depending on him, but he was just one man against 12 trained killers. Then Ace looked up at him with those large, intelligent eyes, and Jake felt something impossible happening. Images flashed through his mind, pictures. That weren't his own memories. He saw other worlds, other skies, and creatures that looked like Dragonlings, but much larger. Ace was trying to tell him something important about who the Dragonlings really were and why they were on this planet, but there was no time to understand. The Poachers were closing in, and Jake had to make a choice between saving himself and protecting the creatures that had somehow become his responsibility. Jake Harrison had never been one to back down from a fight, and he wasn't about to start now. Jake crouched behind a boulder with Ace pressed against his chest, listening to the hoverbikes getting closer. The wounded Dragonling was trying to share something with him through those strange mental images, but Jake couldn't understand what he was seeing. Pictures of giant creatures that looked like Dragonlings but the size of dinosaurs. Vast cities with spires that touched the clouds. And something dark and terrible consuming everything in its path. "Focus, Jake," he whispered to himself. "Deal with the immediate problem first." The hoverbikes were maybe 2 minutes away. Jake could hear Caldwell coordinating his team through their radio chatter. They had him surrounded, or so they thought. Jake looked down at Ace. "I'm sorry, buddy. I tried my best." That's when the impossible happened. Ace looked directly into Jake's eyes, and suddenly Jake could hear a voice in his head. Not words exactly, but meaning that formed itself into language his brain could understand. "Not sorry. Help comes. Trust us." Jake nearly dropped his rifle. The Dragonling had just spoken to him, mind to mind. Before he could process what had happened, the sound of the hoverbikes changed. Instead of approaching engines, Jake heard shouting, weapon fire, and machines crashing into rocks. He peered around the boulder and saw chaos in the canyon below. The air was filled with Dragonlings, dozens of them, diving and weaving around the Poachers' vehicles like tiny fighter pilots. They were too small and fast for the humans to target effectively, but they were causing massive damage. Some carried rocks in their claws, dropping them into engine intakes. Others had somehow gotten into the electrical systems, shorting out weapons and communication equipment. Jake watched in amazement as the Dragonlings executed a coordinated military assault that would have impressed his old drill sergeant. They worked in teams, with some creating distractions while others attacked. Vulnerable points on the hoverbikes. Caldwell's voice rose above the chaos. "What are these things?" "They're acting like they have intelligence. Sir, we're losing main power." Another Poacher shouted. Jake realized this was his chance. With the Poachers distracted and their equipment failing, he could reach their main camp and free any captured Dragonlings. Ace seemed to understand his plan because the wounded creature projected another image into Jake's mind, showing him the location of a large containment unit hidden behind their ship. Jake ran through the canyon, staying low and using the rocks for cover. The Dragonlings saw him coming and adjusted their attack pattern to give him a clear path. It was like having a tiny air force covering his advance. When he reached the Poachers' camp, Jake found what Ace had shown him. A large metal container, hummed with power, and through its transparent walls he could see at least 20 Dragonlings trapped inside. They pressed against the walls when they saw him, their scales flashing with hope. Jake studied the lock mechanism. It was electronic, probably requiring a code or biometric scan. He didn't have time for subtlety, so he shot the control panel with his rifle. Sparks flew, but the door remained sealed. "That won't work, Cowboy." Jake spun around to find Caldwell, pointing a weapon at him. The captain's uniform was torn, and he had scratches on his face from the Dragonling attack, but he was still dangerous. "These creatures are more valuable than you can imagine," Caldwell continued. "Their genetic material can extend human life by decades. We're talking about the fountain of youth, and you're trying to protect a bunch of animals. They're not just, Animals, Jake said, his rifle trained on Caldwell's chest. They're intelligent beings, Caldwell laughed. Intelligence doesn't matter. What matters is profit. Titan Biotech will pay enough money for these specimens to buy a small planet. And what happens to them after you sell them? That's not my concern. I'm just a delivery service. Jake felt Ace's presence in his mind again, stronger this time. More images flowed through the mental connection, and suddenly Jake understood what the Dragonlings really were. They weren't native to this planet at all. They were refugees from somewhere else, somewhere far away, and they were running from something that made human poachers look like a minor inconvenience. The connection between Jake and Ace deepened, and suddenly he could sense all the Dragonlings, not just the one on his shoulder. Their collective consciousness touched his mind, sharing knowledge that made his head spin with its implications. They had come from a world called Sanctuary, far beyond human space. Their people had once been large and powerful, rulers of a vast interstellar civilization. But something had destroyed their homeworld, something that consumed entire planets and left nothing but empty space behind. The Dragonlings were all that remained of their species, reduced in size over generations of hiding and surviving. They had fled across the galaxy looking for a safe place to rebuild. Kestrel Prime was supposed to be that sanctuary, isolated and ignored by the major spacefaring races. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Jake said to Caldwell, his voice changed by the knowledge now flooding his mind. Enlighten me, Caldwell smirked. Jake felt the collective will of the Dragonlings focusing through him. Their combined telepathic ability was far greater than any individual could manage, and Jake found himself becoming a conduit for their power. He reached out with his mind and touched Caldwell's thoughts, sharing with the captain a fraction of what the Dragonlings had shown him. Images of worlds being consumed by darkness, of civilizations screaming as they were devoured by something beyond human comprehension. Caldwell's smirk vanished. His face went pale, and his weapon began to shake in his hands. What was that? He whispered. The truth, Jake said. These Dragonlings aren't just running from you. They're running from something that makes your worst nightmares look like bedtime stories. And by hunting them, by using your scanning equipment and drawing attention to this planet, you've created a beacon that will bring that thing here. Caldwell recovered some of his composure, but Jake could see the fear in his eyes. You're lying, trying to trick me. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. The remaining poachers were running toward the camp, their equipment destroyed and their hover bikes disabled. Some were injured from crashes, others were simply terrified by their encounters with the Dragonlings. Captain, one of them shouted, we need to evacuate. These creatures, they're not natural. They knew exactly how to disable our gear. Caldwell looked back at Jake, uncertainty replacing his earlier confidence. Even if what you're saying is true, I have a contract to fulfill. Titan Biotech doesn't accept failure. Jake felt Ace's presence grow stronger in his mind, and with it, the combined wisdom of the Dragonling collective. They showed him something else, something that changed everything. The Dragonlings weren't just refugees. They were guardians, keepers of ancient knowledge that could help fight the entity that had destroyed their homeworld. But they needed allies, and they needed technology that their reduced civilization couldn't provide. They needed humanity. There's another way, Jake said, lowering his rifle. These Dragonlings have knowledge that could help our entire species. They know how to fight the thing that's coming, but they need partners, not captors. Caldwell studied Jake's face, looking for deception. What are you proposing? Let them go. Help me get them to safety. And maybe we can save both our species from something neither of us can fight alone. The captain was quiet for a long moment, his remaining team gathering around him. In the distance, Dragonlings circled overhead, waiting to see what the humans would decide. Finally, Caldwell holstered his weapon. Show me, he said. Show me what these creatures really are. Jake nodded and reached out with his mind again, this time not to attack but to share. Through the Dragonlings' collective consciousness, he showed Caldwell and his team the true scope of what they were facing. When the mental connection ended, several of the poachers were on their knees, overwhelmed by what they had experienced. Caldwell stood with his hands shaking, staring at the containment unit full of Dragonlings. "God help us all," he whispered. "What have we done?" Jake approached the containment unit and placed his hand on the control panel. The Dragonlings inside watched him with those large, intelligent eyes, waiting to see if their new human allies could be trusted. "We're going to need all the help we can get," Jake said, and activated the emergency release. The door swung open, and 20 Dragonlings burst into the air, their scales flashing with joy and relief. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient and hungry had noticed their little planet. And it was coming. 3 days after freeing the captured Dragonlings, Jake stood in his homestead surrounded by former enemies who had become unlikely allies. Caldwell and his remaining team had set up their equipment inside Jake's main room, working alongside the Dragonlings to analyze the data from their scanning operations. The mental connection between Jake and Ace had grown stronger, allowing him to communicate with the entire Dragonling collective. Through this link, he learned details that made him wish he had never found the hidden valley. "Bell, show them the readings from Sector 12. Jake said to his AI assistant. The main screen displayed a three-dimensional map of local space around. Kestrel Prime, what they saw made everyone in the room go quiet. "The spatial distortions are getting worse," Bell reported. "Whatever's approaching is massive enough to bend space-time around itself." Caldwell studied the display with professional military interest. "How long do we have?" Ace projected an image into Jake's mind, which he translated for the others. "The Dragonlings calculate maybe 6 months before it reaches the outer edge of this system, but that's not the worst part." Jake felt the collective consciousness of the Dragonlings, sharing more information, and his heart sank even further. "They say this isn't the main entity. It's just a scout, something the Devourer sends ahead to test planetary defenses." "The Devourer?" asked Lisa, one of Caldwell's technicians who had proven surprisingly helpful with the alien technology. Jake closed his eyes and let the Dragonlings share their memories through him. What he saw made him understand why these creatures had shrunk themselves down and hidden for so long. Imagine something the size of a moon, but alive. It moves between star systems, consuming every form of life it encounters. Planets, space, stations, entire civilizations, all just food for this thing. The Dragonlings' ancestors called it the Devourer because that's all it does. It devours everything. The room fell silent except for the quiet humming of equipment. Finally, Caldwell spoke up. "How do we fight something like that?" Through his connection with Ace, Jake accessed the Dragonlings' ancestral memories. He saw images of great battles fought across the galaxy, of mighty civilizations that had tried and failed to stop the Devourer. Their ancestors were part of an alliance, Jake explained. Dozens of species working together. They managed to imprison the Devourer in a pocket dimension, but the prison weakened over thousands of years. About 200 years ago, it broke free, and it's been eating its way across the galaxy since then, Caldwell concluded. The Dragonlings have been running ever since. They chose this planet because it was supposed to be isolated, ignored by major civilizations. But our scanning activity, the psychic energy from their fear when you were hunting them, it created a beacon that the scout detected. Bell's voice interrupted them. "Jake, I'm receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It's marked urgent and classified." Jake looked at Caldwell, who nodded. "Put it through, Bell." The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Admiral Patricia Wayne, head of Earth's Defense Council. Jake had never met her, but her reputation was legendary. "This is Admiral Wayne broadcasting to all colonial settlements. We have detected massive gravitational anomalies in several systems along the outer rim. All colonial assets are ordered to prepare for immediate evacuation. This is not a drill." The transmission ended, leaving them staring at a blank screen. "They know," Caldwell said quietly. "Earth knows something's coming." Ace shared another burst of images with Jake, and this time the information was even more disturbing. "The Dragonlings say Earth can't run from this. The Devourer doesn't just consume individual planets. It seeks out the home systems of intelligent species and devours them completely. Running will only delay the inevitable. Then what do we do? Lisa asked. Jake felt the weight of the Dragonlings' collective knowledge pressing against his mind. They had been carrying this burden for generations, knowing that their species possessed part of the key to stopping the devourer, but lacking the resources to use it. There's a way to rebuild the prison, Jake said slowly, but it requires technology. From multiple civilizations and a willing sacrifice from representatives of each species involved. What kind of sacrifice? Caldwell asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer before Jake could respond. Alarms started blaring throughout his homestead. Bell's voice cut through the noise with urgent information. Multiple contacts approaching from the north, 3 ships, moving fast and low. Jake ran to the window and saw them coming. 3 sleek vessels that looked nothing like human designs, moving in perfect formation toward his homestead. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, with flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to shift color as they moved. "Those aren't human ships," Caldwell said, reaching for his weapon. "No," Jake replied, his connection with the Dragonlings providing him with the identification. "They're Kefter vessels. The Dragonlings say they're another refugee species." The ships landed in Jake's front yard with impossible grace, their engines making no sound at all. Ramps extended from their hulls, and tall, slender beings emerged. They looked roughly humanoid, but with elongated limbs and faces that were more angular than human features. Their skin had a blue-gray tint, and their eyes were large and completely black. One of them approached Jake's front door and spoke in perfect English, though its voice had a musical quality that suggested the language wasn't natural to it. "I am Commander Veltar of the Kefter Remnant Fleet. We have detected the presence of sanctuary survivors on this world. We come seeking alliance." Jake opened the door, with Ace perched on his shoulder and the other Dragonlings clustering around him. The alien commander looked at them with what might have been relief. "You are the humans who have chosen to protect them," Veltar observed. "This gives us hope. We have been searching for both your species and theirs for many cycles." "How did you find us?" Jake asked. "The same psychic beacon that attracted the Devourer's scout also reached us. We have been monitoring long-range communications for any mention of anomalous life forms. Your Admiral's emergency broadcast confirmed our suspicions." Caldwell stepped forward, his military training taking over. "What do you know about the threat we're facing?" Commander Veltar gestured toward his ships. "We know that the Devourer has awakened and is moving toward this region of space. We know that the ancient prison can be rebuilt. And we know that it requires cooperation between humans, the sanctuary survivors, and the remnants of the Kefter civilization." "And the sacrifice?" Jake asked, dreading the answer. "The prison is powered by life force itself. It requires willing representatives from each allied species to give their consciousness to maintain the containment field. They become part of the prison, eternal guardians who hold the Devourer in check." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Jake felt Ace's presence in his mind, sharing the Dragonling's determination to see this through regardless of the cost. "How long do we have to decide?" Lisa asked. Veltar's expression grew grim. "The scout will reach this system within days, not months. If we cannot establish the prison here and now, using this planet as the focal point, the Devourer will consume everything in this galaxy within a century." Jake looked around the room at the faces of humans and Dragonlings who had become his family. Outside, the Kefter ships waited with their advanced technology and desperate hopes. "What do we need to do?" Jake asked. Commander Veltar gestured to his second-in-command, who began unloading equipment from their ships. "We need to combine our technologies with your planet's fusion reactor and the psychic abilities of the sanctuary survivors. The process will create a dimensional rift that can trap the scout and send a signal to the main entity, convincing it that this area of space has already been consumed." "And if it doesn't work?" Caldwell asked. Veltar looked directly at Jake when he answered. "Then we die together as allies instead of separately as prey?" Jake felt Ace's agreement through their mental link, along with the resolve of every Dragonling on the planet. They had been running for too long. It was time to make a stand. "Then let's get started," Jake said. "We have a prison to build." Outside, the stars seemed brighter than usual, as if the approaching darkness was making the remaining light more precious. Soon, those same stars would witness either the greatest victory in galactic history or the final stand of 3 dying civilizations. The work took 2 days and nights without rest. Jake's homestead had been transformed into a command center where 3 species worked together to build humanity's last hope. Kefter engineers integrated their dimensional technology with Jake's fusion reactor, while the Dragonlings provided psychic coordination for the massive undertaking. Jake stood in the center of it all, his consciousness now permanently linked with both Ace and Commander Veltar through the growing network that would power the prison. The mental connection allowed them to coordinate the complex procedure, but it also meant he could feel everything the others were experiencing through Veltar's memories. He saw the Kefter homeworld being consumed by the Devourer 50 years ago. Through the Dragonlings' collective consciousness, he witnessed the destruction of Sanctuary and dozens of other worlds. The weight of all that loss and death pressed against his mind like a physical force. "Jake, the reactor is reaching critical parameters," Bell announced. "The dimensional field will activate in 30 minutes. Caldwell and his team had proved invaluable, using their military experience to coordinate the evacuation of nearby terraforming stations and establish a communication network with Earth. They had also volunteered to stay behind, despite Jake's protests. "Someone needs to make sure this thing works," Caldwell had said. "And if it doesn't, someone should be here to send a final warning to Earth." Through the mental link, Jake felt the Devourer's scout approaching. It was still days away in normal space, but its presence was distorting reality around Kestrel Prime. Electronics flickered randomly, gravity fluctuated in small areas, and the very air seemed to vibrate with wrongness. "The entity has detected our preparations," Veltar reported, his musical voice strained with effort. "It is accelerating its approach." Jake closed his eyes and reached out through the network of linked minds. He could sense the Devourer's scout now, a massive presence of hunger and destruction that made his soul recoil in horror. But he could also sense something else, something the creature couldn't detect. The prison was almost ready. "Ace, are your people prepared?" Jake asked through their mental connection. The Dragonling's response came laden with determination and sorrow. The sacrifice required from the Sanctuary survivors was the greatest of all. They would need to merge their collective consciousness into the prison's control matrix, becoming the living heart of the containment system. "We have been ready for generations," Ace replied. "We have waited for allies who could help us make this choice meaningful." Veltar's thoughts joined the conversation. "My ship has been transmitting the technical specifications to Earth through quantum relay. If we fail here, your people will at least have the knowledge to try again." Jake felt a moment of pride in his species. Humans were newcomers to the galaxy. Barely 2 centuries into space travel, yet they had been chosen as partners in this desperate alliance. The Dragonlings and Kefter could have approached any number of older, more advanced civilizations, but they had chosen to trust humanity. 5 minutes to activation," Bell announced. Jake opened his eyes and looked around his transformed homestead. Kefter machines hummed with alien energies, while Dragonlings perched on every available surface, their scales glowing with psychic power. Caldwell and his team monitored human equipment that was pushed far beyond its design limits. In the center of it all, a swirling vortex of energy grew larger with each passing second. The dimensional rift that would become the Devourer's prison looked like a miniature galaxy, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Jake," Veltar said aloud, his black eyes reflecting the swirling energies, "it is time to make the final choice. Once we commit to this path, there is no retreat." Jake felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. He was a cowboy from Montana who had come to this planet to escape his past. Now he was being asked to sacrifice everything. To save the future through his connection with Ace, he felt the Dragonling's absolute trust in him. Through his link with Veltar, he sensed the Kethter's desperate hope. And through his own human heart, he felt the responsibility to protect not just these allies, but every living being in the galaxy. I understand, Jake said. Let's do this. The fusion reactor's hum changed pitch, rising to a whine that made everyone's teeth ache. The dimensional rift expanded rapidly, its edge now touching the walls of Jake's homestead. Reality warped around them as space and time bent to accommodate the growing prison. Jake felt his consciousness being drawn into the network, merging with minds alien and familiar. Ace's thoughts became his thoughts, Veltar's memories became his memories. He experienced the combined knowledge of three civilizations, their hopes and fears and desperate determination. Through the expanding psychic network, Jake suddenly sensed something that changed everything. The Devourer's scout wasn't just approaching. Kestrel Prime, it was here, materializing in the space above the planet like a nightmare made real. The creature was beyond description, a writhing mass of darkness and hunger that devoured light itself. It had no fixed shape, constantly shifting between forms that hurt to perceive. Where it touched space, stars went out. "It's early," Caldwell shouted over the growing noise of the reactor. "The readings show it's already in orbit." Jake felt the scout's attention turn toward the planet, drawn by the massive energy signature of their prison construction. The creature's hunger was like a physical force pressing against his mind, threatening to drive him insane with its intensity. "We're not ready," Lisa called out. "The containment field needs another 10 minutes to stabilize." Through the mental network, Jake felt Veltar and the Dragonlings reaching the same conclusion he had. The prison wouldn't be complete in time to trap the scout. But there was another option, one that would require an even greater sacrifice. "We can't contain it," Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "But we can redirect it." He felt understanding flow through the network. Instead of building a prison around the scout, they could create a dimensional tunnel that would send the creature back to where it came from, along with a false signal indicating that this entire region of space had already been consumed. The process would require them to channel the scout's own energy through their minds, using their linked consciousness as a conduit for forces that would destroy them in the process. "Jake, no," Bell's voice cut through the noise. "The energy levels would be lethal to all organic life in the area, but it would work," Veltar confirmed. "The false signal would convince the Devourer that this galaxy has nothing left to consume. It would move on to other regions of space." Jake felt Ace's scales against his shoulder and the Dragonlings' unwavering trust in their shared decision. Around the room, every Dragonling began to glow with psychic energy, preparing to give their lives for a chance to save their allies. "There's got to be another way," Caldwell said. But his voice lacked conviction. Jake looked at the dimensional rift, now large enough to walk through. On the other side, he could sense the pathway that would lead the scout back to the void between galaxies. All it needed was someone to guide it there. "Maybe there is," Jake said quietly. "Bell, can you establish a communication link with Earth?" "I can try, but the dimensional interference is severe." "Do it." After a moment of static, Admiral Wayne's face appeared on the screen, distorted by interference but clearly visible. "This is Jake Harrison on Kestrel Prime," Jake said. "I'm transmitting complete technical specifications for advanced dimensional technology. This information comes from our new allies, the survivors of civilizations that have been fighting the entity approaching our galaxy." Jake felt the network of linked minds focusing through him, downloading centuries of scientific knowledge into Bell's memory banks for transmission to Earth. "The immediate threat will be neutralized," Jake continued, "but the main entity is still out there. Humanity will need to build on this foundation and find other allies if we're going to have a chance." Admiral Wayne's response was broken by static, but Jake could make out enough to understand. "Received and confirmed. Godspeed, son." The scout's presence was growing stronger, its hunger pressing against the planet's atmosphere. Jake could see it through the walls of his homestead, a darkness that blotted out the stars. "It's time," Veltar said. Jake placed his hand on the control matrix that would activate the dimensional tunnel. Through his connection with Ace and the Dragonlings, he felt their combined determination. Through his link with Veltar, he sensed the Kethter's final farewell to their destroyed homeworld. For Sanctuary, Ace whispered in his mind. For Kethter, Veltar added. For Earth, Jake said aloud, and activated the Matrix, the dimensional. Rift exploded outward, engulfing the homestead and expanding into space. Jake felt his consciousness being pulled into the tunnel, becoming part of the pathway that would guide the scout away from the galaxy. The process was agony beyond description, but also strangely peaceful. Through the network of linked minds, Jake experienced the combined memories of 3 civilizations. He saw wonders beyond imagination and horrors beyond description, but also the thread of hope that connected all living beings. As his physical form dissolved into energy, Jake felt the scout being drawn through the tunnel, confused and disoriented by the false signals the network was generating.